Native Americans are the original inhabitants of North America, yet they are often excluded from national conversations about race, policy, and representation. While other minority groups receive widespread media coverage and political attention, Native issues remain largely overlooked. Why does this happen? And what are the consequences of this invisibility? One major reason is historical erasure. From the moment of colonization, U.S. policies have sought to eliminate Native cultures, whether through forced removals, boarding schools, or assimilation programs. The dominant narrative in American history often portrays indigenous people as part of the past, rather than acknowledging that they are still here. As Native scholar Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz states, the myth of the vanished Indian allows America to ignore its ongoing responsibility to Native nations. Another factor is media invisibility. Native Americans are rarely seen in movies, TV shows, or news coverage. When they are often depicted through outdated stereotypes, either as historical figures or as struggling communities plagued by poverty and addiction. Even during major Native-led movements like Standing Rock, notable mainstream media largely ignored the protests until social media forced them to pay attention. Political neglect is another issue. Native Americans have the lowest voter turnout rates of any racial group, partly due to systemic barriers like voter ID laws and a lack of polling places on reservations. Many politicians also fail to address Native issues, seeing them as less politically important. Even when policies affect Native communities directly, such as environmental laws impacting tribal lands, indigenous voices are often left out of the discussion. The small population size of Native Americans also contributes to their invisibility. As of the 2020 U.S. Census, they make up only about 2% of the population. This has led some to falsely assume that Native issues are not as urgent as those facing larger minority groups. However, indigenous communities experience some of the highest rates of poverty, violence, and health disparities in the country, making their struggles just as critical. Despite these challenges, Native people are fighting to reclaim visibility. Movements like #LandBack, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, and Indigenous Peoples Day are challenging the status quo, forcing the U.S. to confront its long history of Native erasure. Native filmmakers, authors, and activists are also working to change the narrative, showing that indigenous cultures are alive, diverse, and resilient. So, why are Native Americans the most forgotten minority in the U.S.? The answer lies in historical erasure, media neglect, political exclusion, and systemic barriers. The real question is, how can Native voices be amplified so they are no longer treated as an afterthought? What do you think? Let's continue the conversation.